Hello, welcome to the Aartech Pro Connect podcast, where we connect the industry experts to the industry pros with real conversations. I'm Allie, and I am joined by Jeff Barrett, Aartech's VP of Sales and Marketing. Today, we're connecting with TRENDnet, known for their pro-grade networking solutions, including managed switches, wireless access points, PoE infrastructure, and more, all important for high-performance installs. Let's dive in.
Certainly appreciate the support that Ryan and his team always give us. So great opportunity for us to go back and forth of basically a lot of the stuff that we hear in terms of feedback from customers, both good and bad, as well as things we've picked up over the years that we want to kind of pass along to maybe somebody that's getting a head start into the networking or maybe taking things to a next level on the security side, things of that nature. So Ryan, everybody knows who I am. They've heard me talk enough. But for you, if you don't mind taking a quick minute just to introduce yourself, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely appreciate you having me today. As you mentioned, my name is Ryan Hedges. I'm one of the channel account managers here at TRENDnet. And we're primarily known for just providing networking hardware and products for small to medium-sized business and large commercial opportunities, catering to various solutions ranging from surveillance to access control to just large networking deployments.
Perfect. Appreciate that. All right. So why don't we just kind of dive in? I'm going to start with a vague comment, but I think it hits home. I heard from somebody once tell me that the networking is the silent killer of good installs. And it kind of stuck with me for a lot of reasons, right? Because no matter what vertical you're in, no matter what you're installing, I think that holds true. And the longer I've been here, the more complaints and the more problems I hear that really do trace back to a networking issue versus a product on a camera side or, et cetera, et cetera. So with that in mind, can you touch just a little bit on that before I get into specifics here, Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I actually like the way that you put that. We're definitely in a day now where everything kind of is IP based, whether we're looking at surveillance or access control, or just even like home automation. A multitude of things now can be pretty much powered and networked and even controlled through networking switches, access points, things like that. And that can sometimes be a little cumbersome, especially when, we have things such as like cameras have a very black and white approach to things, just common, just, keep visuals on something, record video, capture motion and stuff like that. But obviously that's kind of going to have to, pipe through, a bunch of category cable and kind of eventually kind of, go out to the internet, kind of come down and kind of come back and just kind of, be accessible. So it's very easy sometimes for things to kind of get lost in translation per se. So, it can be, as cumbersome as we need it to be, but we can also make it as simply, as simple as possible. And that's kind of what we try to do. We try to take some of the nuances out of networking, so when, we do have some of these deployments, whether it's a smaller one or a much larger one, we can kind of, cut away some of the confusion rather, and just kind of simplify some things because, it is easy at times to, miss a dot or a number in your IP address or, not connect something properly and stuff like that. So there's definitely times where we have some small deployments to large deployments where everything's working great as it should be, but then there's a hang up somewhere, and it's that trial and error sometimes, but then it's also just kind of digging in a little bit and kind of just doing some R&D to try and figure out what may be happening. And sometimes it does kind of fall back to the actual network itself as a whole, and then from a granular level we can look at the actual devices. And I think that's why it's imperative, as professionals, we do our part to make sure that we educate, but also we do our part to make sure that we put our best foot forward, with educating ourselves on these solutions and stuff like that we see in the industry. While we may be solely focused on the networking side of stuff, it's very beneficial and advantageous of us to also understand what you're connecting to our switches, what you're using our devices for and stuff like that, because that allows us to become more efficient in our processes and procedures, but also to become more intentional in our direction and our focus with our products, and their intended uses and stuff like that. So I'm definitely going to be doing my part, and our team definitely does our part to make sure that, some of those things, some of those silent killers, as you so eloquently put it, are kind of maybe put at bay. Maybe we can kind of thwart some of those things. So when issues do arise, hopefully we can, mitigate those to be as little as possible, but we can hopefully kind of get those things kind of up and going, and running smoothly as they should be with very limited interruption or hiccups along the way.
Yeah, you transitioned me pretty nicely into what my next point. So obviously we do a lot of cameras, you know that. We're big in the security world. A lot of our installers are security based. And I'm going to simplify this a little bit and say on average, maybe 8 out of 10 times when a camera goes down, it's not the camera, right? It's the network, it's the power budget, whatever you want to term it as. So how deep can you talk into that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. No, definitely. So, obviously, surveillance is probably one of the larger categories that we see our products being used in. We obviously have a multitude of products ranging from mild to wild. So, we do see various things come by. But to your point, cameras sometimes do go down. Sometimes devices come back unresponsive and stuff. And it may not necessarily be that edge device that that's actually connected to it. Sometimes there could be an interruption in service, whether, there's an interruption with the ISP sometimes that maybe kind of cuts things out and then the switch doesn't know what to do. So it kind of goes into like a fail safe and kind of just prevents anything from happening to that port. And then it leaves it up to the device to pretty much auto rectify kind of what's going on and kind of bring that back online. Furthermore, we could also have things like with budgetary, measures and stuff like that. That's where, education kind of comes key with that. With a lot of these devices that we have, especially on the surveillance side, there's two key metrics that we had to pay in mind with, and that's going to be what the operating pretty much wattage is going to be, but then like the maximum consumption of that's going to be too. And sometimes that can kind of cause some problems along the way because, we could take just a regular 8 megapixel camera, for example, and let's just say the maximum consumption on that's 12 watts. But the operating wattage, let's just say, kind of falls at maybe 8 for this example. So if we have a switch that's kind of, fully packed with cameras, but the budget itself of that switch isn't enough to feed the maximum wattage across the board, what it'll do is it'll pretty much do a first come, first serve type of scenario. So, that fifth or sixth camera on the switch, if there's not enough there to boot it up, they're just not going to boot. And then that's going to obviously cause an issue with the installer, with the customer by not having that camera being visible. And obviously that could be resolved by using like a managed switch that kind of will work proactively in a solution as well. But there's definitely a lot of things that can kind of play into a device not being responsive. But that again kind of can be thwarted a little bit by making sure that we put the best product for that solution in that scenario, be it a managed or just a switch that maybe has a higher budget overall. So I gotta go further into this. Whenever I talk to an installer, and let's just say a surveillance installer, I like model numbers, I like part numbers, I like to kind of get my eyes on that stuff because we want to do those takeoffs a little bit. We want to see the devices that we're going to be using and make sure that we put the best switch for that because not only is that maximum wattage going to be a concern for us to make sure that there's sufficient power for these devices, but we want to make sure that we kind of go beyond that threshold a little bit. So there's a little bit of a reserve left over in the event, let's just say that the actual consumption might be 12.3 or like 12.4 watts, because those 0.3, 0.4s, those add up over time, especially when you're having, 4, 5, 6 or more devices on that. Um, and then, really after that, a lot of people want to be concerned with like the bandwidth. And I might be kind of getting a little bit ahead here, but that's another key component too that we want to kind of bear in mind with. A lot of the devices that we have will support 1 gig speeds, 1,000 megabits per second, which is fantastic. We do have a few fast Ethernet products for those, smaller deployments that maybe haven't adopted or maybe moved up to 1 gig. But we've even gone beyond that now. We have the capability of networking up to 10 gig speeds. That's phenomenal. That's super fast. And a lot of people sometimes kind of get concerned a little bit because they may have some of these higher powered cameras, maybe cameras with multi-image sensors and stuff like that, or maybe motors and stuff. And while that kind of maybe more plays into the power side of things, current technology with surveillance is amazing. We've got H.264 and H.265 compression currently available with every major surveillance line out there. And that does a really good job of compressing the packets of data back and forth so we don't actually consume as much bandwidth as one would think. But it's definitely something that we want to take in mind because, while we may have a product that can support these speeds and maybe support just the workload of data that's going to and from, we also want to make sure that the customer understands too that the ISP provides sufficient bandwidth that can be utilized to make sure that we're not causing any unintentional bottlenecks in the network that could potentially be a silent killer to this system overall.
Right. No, and that's well said. And we're going to touch on managed switches in a few minutes here. So let's go back to the PoE for a second. I think you used a term I was going to ask you about later to define. So I've got the term power budgeting, right? And that's basically what you were just touching on, right? In terms of allocations and making sure. I often use a generator as an example. If you're, your power goes down at the house and you've got a generator and you want to be able to run two table saws, well, the table saw has a rating of this, but when you actually turn it on, it spikes double what it says on the box. And you need to kind of take those kind of things into consideration. So I often say PoE isn't just power, right? Like it's power budgeting. It's getting into some of these managed capabilities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. And that's, and that's one of the things too, and I also go a little bit further and actually kind of use an analogy and kind of tell people like when you start your car, you're starting your car solely off the car's battery. That is the most juice that battery is going to take is when you're turning it over. And then we obviously rely on the alternator to kind of recharge it over time as you're driving. Same with the switches, these switches on the PCB boards have little capacitors and stuff built in. So when something's plugged in, it's kind of got that juice to kind of get it going. But then pretty much we're going to see a surge of power usage kind of go through immediately. And then obviously once that's kind of taken to boot these things up and everything's up and operational, everything kind of levels back down. So if we were to look, for example, at like one of our managed switches, through the interface, you can actually see the power demand kind of on a graph there. And you'll actually be able to see like a little bit of a spike where we can see obviously that devices are going to come online and stuff like that. And those are certain things that we can use from a maintenance standpoint and things like that to make sure that we're looking at a healthy switch or a healthy device on the network and stuff. So budget is huge. That's definitely a big thing. Regardless of what we're going to be connecting to our switches, whether it's going to be one of our access points for a wireless deployment, or we're going to be maybe powering a PoE powered switch, cameras, access control, gate readers. Everything these days can be powered over IP, or powered through, I should say, category cable, utilizing IP. We want to make sure, obviously, that the power is there. We want to make sure that there's sufficient power. We want to make sure that we can future-proof these things too. That's big. Technology is ever evolving. We have school systems, we have a lot of verticals that are on like a 3 or a 5 year rollover. So, as soon as the new standards ratified, whether it be Wi-Fi 7 that was recently ratified, or we have a new PoE standard or something that might come out. A lot of these verticals, a lot of the professionals in those verticals kind of keep eye on that. So, we're also doing our part to stay, a few steps ahead to future proof these things. And PoE and power budgets and stuff like that play a huge role in that stuff because, as we add products and add devices, we never want to leave a switch vulnerable to being replaced in the future because that I view that as a disservice. So we definitely want to make sure that we're obviously taking everything into consideration, and that obviously starts with education. It can follow through with training, but then also just more importantly, just the support of that stuff. So it it's needed and it's not going anywhere. Power over Ethernet, man. I think we've only scratched the surface of what we can actually push through a category cable. Right now I think we're tapped at about 100 watts of what we can currently do. But there's talks in the industry that we may be surpassing that in the near future, which is it's fascinating. Looking
Yeah.
forward to it.
Well, and 100 watts goes a lot further than it used to, too, right? I mean, that was one light bulb 10, 15 years ago. So I think as devices get more
Absolutely.
efficient, and then you're increasing the power capability in general. So again, got ahead of me and nailed one of my questions already. But so planning for that future growth, I think you
Apologies.
summed it up really well there, talking about, the top professionals, I'll deem it. Are they essentially swapping switches every 3 to 5 years when a new protocol comes out, or are they constantly checking in on these systems? Like, can you give a bit more info there?
Yeah. So, with the people that I work with in the industry, they're definitely staying on top of their knowledge. I think that's first and foremost probably one of the most important things for them is kind of just staying ahead of the technologies, what's incoming, from a wireless standpoint, the latest and greatest encryptions to keep data safe and secure. That's obviously one of the key points with a lot of wireless networking is going to be the security of it, but just networking in general and stuff like that. Um, Various feature sets from maybe like a management perspective. Obviously, as we get into larger and larger deployments and larger solutions and stuff like that, as these networks kind of grow out and their roots kind of spread, that drives the need for management. So obviously a lot of people look into that. I will say there is some replacement going on, but it's actually more or less on the wireless side of stuff. Switches, obviously, our switches have lifetime warranties, so they're designed to be deployed and kind of run forever. But it really just depends on the scope of work if that negates replacing them or maybe adding to it. So it may not necessarily warrant maybe replacing a switch per se, but maybe one of those things where we add to it. Maybe we expand on upon a system, and then as there's a need arises to maybe replace that, we do so. A little bit different in wireless though, especially in verticals like education and even like state and local governments and stuff like that. We have a local school here in my area. Back when Wi-Fi 6 was ratified, within the month that we got that notice in the industry, we were seeing some IT professionals push out RFQs just to kind of see what it would cost to maybe update their wireless infrastructure to actually support the current standard. Of course, with that, the other side of it is we need to make sure our client devices can accept that. So if we have older legacy devices and stuff like that, pushing just a single channel Wi-Fi 6 deployment may not be beneficial. That's why we make sure we have dual band so we can support both legacy and modern devices. So everyone can kind of communicate and kind of just, do what they need to and kind of just keep that harmony per se. A little harder with switches though. Cost incurred obviously going to be a little bit higher, but it really just depends. It depends if it's going to be mission critical type stuff or if we're just, connecting an admin office in a school. But that's where obviously education. So I would definitely say probably the biggest thing for really any IT or networking professional is they're on the newsletters. They're a part of larger communities. They're staying up to date with maybe local reps or even the manufacturers that they partnered with and stuff like that, or the ones that they prefer, just so they can kind of stay up to date on maybe what it is that they're doing, or maybe the trends that they're seeing that maybe they can look into and then plan accordingly if they're seeing certain trajectories in the market or in the industry kind of go a certain way than maybe what they had thought. So education is definitely key with this one, but we see a mixture of both.
And I'm glad I asked you to clarify that because I definitely kind of heard that as more maybe a swap every 3 to 5 years. Great for me in the hardware business, but that's not necessarily what we're trying to do. I think I'm going to oversimplify this again. That's what I do, and I'm dating myself here. But networking is the opposite of set it and forget it, right? I mean, we remember that infomercial, set it and forget it. I think that's what happens a
Yeah,
lot with a lot of our installers. They go in, they put an automation network in, they put a switch in, and then unless the customer calls them there's no proactive anything. But to me, not only to use that, it's a disservice, but it's a revenue generator. I mean, when you
yeah,
leave that install, schedule something 12 months out, schedule something 18 months out, whatever deems for that level of customer, where you're following up and the customer knows that's part of the package, right? Whether you're charging for them up front or not. But it's absolutely, even the simplest network requires somebody to go in and look. To your point, maybe they plugged three things in and the power is now pulled over, the bandwidth is pulled too hard, whatever the case may be, right? So,
absolutely. Yeah, I can't stress enough maintenance contracts for everything. And networking is no different. We may be able to go with like an unmanaged switch. Yeah, you can set that and forget it. It's just a simple plug and play. It's designed to um its a sole purpose is to do just simple basic functions to just network stuff, maybe power stuff if it's PoE. But once we start stepping into like managed devices and stuff like that, you know, I mean, these are intelligent devices that we're using. They're not necessarily up to the computing power of like a computer per se or a laptop. But we do support our products for the entirety of its lifespan and then some. So, there's software updates, there's firmware updates. There's various things that we can do to make sure that these devices that we're deploying are working to the highest performance that they can achieve at any point in time. So absolutely, it's definitely you would be doing a huge disservice to anybody if you were to just maybe deploy a switch of any kind into a solution and just think that it's going to work indefinitely without any type of intervention or any type of assistance there. Um, because one of those things, things do change, from a software perspective, I don't want to say accidents happen, but things pop up that maybe we
yeah.
realize maybe we can do more efficiently, or maybe things in the industry change a little bit that have maybe improved upon virtually every aspect of the product in the market and stuff like that. So, we definitely want to make sure that, we're keeping our eyes on stuff. We're keeping our hands on things. And, we've definitely done our part, with remote management. That might be getting a little ahead there again as well, but those are other measures that we can do as a manufacturer to support our professionals in the market to make sure that not only are they, putting their best foot forward and they're, standing behind a product that's standing behind them, but their customers have that reassurance as well that, hey, we're taking care of everything's good, a trusted brand from a trusted installer and a trusted industry. What can go wrong? Everything's good.
And sales tip here too, right? I mean that follow-up call is often an opportunity to go back and install or expand on. Again, in the automation world, it's addictive. So a customer will ask for this, and this be out of necessity. But once they've got it and they're playing with it, then their son asks for this, their wife asks for this, their mother-in-law asks for this. So it's a huge opportunity to incorporate into your upsell as well, to be honest. Okay, perfect. I appreciate that. But let's jump into the managed versus unmanaged for a second. I think this is when I'm
Sure.
training new staff, this is one of the more confusing. When I'm talking to somebody in general, the first question they ask me is why managed? And so let's start with the simplest question. When is unmanaged acceptable? When is unmanaged more than enough?
So unmanaged for me is honestly, if we're doing just a small deployment, if we're looking, for residential automation, for example, let's say, we've got, automated blinds or even lighting now in residential homes and stuff, and even commercial buildings can actually be powered by PoE or PoE plus, things that are just designed to do intended functions. So there's no real networking besides just sending a message of like on off, or things like that, and obviously providing power. Very, very simplistic needs, perfect for unmanaged switches. Now with managed, I mean, shoot, we can go really all over the place with this because we have certain categories of managed switches depending on the actual need. If we're doing, a commercial deployment of any kind, we always stress setting up a VLAN, so a virtual local area network. That way we can pretty much partition our solution on the same network, but kind of keep it behind an invisible wall per se to kind of keep prying eyes or sticky fingers from touching it too much. Great for access control, great for surveillance, great for gate controllers and all that type of stuff. It's a great way that installers can protect their customer solution to make sure that they can improve upon its just operability and just making sure that things work as fluid as they should. We can go one step further and focus on like the IT professionals and stuff like that. A lot of these larger companies, Fortune 500s, data centers, schools, hospitals, state and local governments, and stuff like that, they generally have an IT team on site that actually manages everything and supports the day-to-day needs of their colleagues and stuff like that as well. They generally lean on wanting something that's more like layer two. That gives them the utmost control of the network. They can control what the information is doing, where the traffic is going. They also have the ability of limiting traffic, limiting user access to certain things. They can control the power to the port. Literally anything that they would want that switch to do within reason, they would be able to do it, which is great. So it really just kind of depends on what we're doing, really what the scope of work is. We obviously can advocate for just something like setting up a VLAN. But if we have a certain schedule, we can't set schedules on an unmanaged switch. We can't intervene at all other than just unplugging it from the wall or just plugging the device directly out from the RJ45 port. Whereas if we were to go with like a managed switch, we have the ability of going in there, and setting a schedule. We can set a reboot schedule every week at the end of the day, on the last day of work outside of office hours. So the whole system shuts itself down and boots itself right back up. So we have a fresh reboot and hopefully all the devices come back online. Additionally, once we start stepping into managed switches and managed devices, we now get the benefit of proactive features kind of working for us rather than against us. So all of our managed switches have the ability, out of the box to start pinging linked devices to make sure that they're connected. That's critical because obviously, what's the last thing we want when a device is connected into any switch? We don't want it to go down, but if it does go down, we want to know about it. But also,
Right.
we want to be safeguarded knowing that the switch is going to do its part to try and bring that device back online before an actual human needs to intervene, and maybe actually dig a little deeper to see if there's an issue with the device or the device that it's connected into. Um, those are all measures that we built into all of our managed switches, that really just kind of further add to the value, that our professionals in the market and our dealers alike are able to offer to their customers, on a day-to-day basis. So it really just depends on what we're doing. Obviously, the sooner we can be brought into this stuff so we can help, assist with product recommendations, whether we're doing system design or anything like that, it just helps us kind of get ahead recommend the right product, but also more importantly, it gives us an opportunity to let them know why they need it. Really, because a lot of people don't understand why they need a certain feature or what that benefit would be. But a quick conversation, kind of just lets them know, oh, I didn't know that, or I didn't know I needed that, or more importantly, I didn't know that I could do that. So
Right.
these things, it's a lot of intelligence plugged into our network that not a lot of people know about, but that's the point. It's working in the background kind of as its own little silent assassin, making sure that everything's working properly.
Yeah, I think that's key, right? I mean, I jokingly say all the time, I don't know what I don't know. Like, there's
Yeah.
absolutely no way I can consider something if I have no idea of its existence. So, of the things that you just mentioned there on the managed side, what percentage of those features are accessible remotely?
So right now, none of them are accessible remotely unless we have Hive. So Hive is our remote management platform. And once we actually have the devices on Hive, they're all accessible. So essentially, the long and short of it is anything that we can do locally on a managed switch, we can now do remotely. So typically, before Hive even existed for us, I would go out, install a switch, and then I would pretty much, set up that profile and just kind of manage everything and kind of just set all my provisions on site. And then I would leave, and it was really kind of up to either having a maintenance contract or stopping by the office to make sure that everything's working and operational. Or my least favorite, the customer lets us know that there's an issue. And I never like it when the customer lets us know. I'd like to be proactive and let them know first, but then also let them know, hey, there's a problem, but I also have a resolution. You don't have to worry about it.
Right.
Hive brings that reassurance back to our deployments. It allows our installers to go the extra mile to let our customers know, hey, we don't have anything to worry about here because we've set this stuff up. Everything's going to be great and operational, but also we kind of have our eyes and ears out there in the internet, kind of keeping track of everything because the um, the pinging devices, like I mentioned just moments earlier, we can actually now go into and actually set a series of alerts and notifications. Now, we still have access to that locally, but we have to be on site. So, unless we're working on site 24/7 days or 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, we're not going to get that because all of that plain text HTML that's going to be sent on the local network. Once we kind of step out and start doing remote management, now we have the access of getting that sent to us anywhere that we have access to internet. And that is immensely beneficial to all professionals because they want to be efficient. Efficiency is key in this world because obviously time is money. And the last thing that we want to do is waste anyone's time. So, again, if we can take that intelligent device that's sitting on the customer's network and we can have it set up to kind of doing its job and kind of working like a workhorse like it does, but then add that remote aspect to it, knowing that, hey, now we can be even more proactive anywhere in the world. If we're on another job site, if it's on the weekend or whatever, we can see with our cell phone or even with our laptop. Oh, we just realized that, two of the ports on Aartech switch went down. The switch tried to reboot it 3 times. Devices came back unresponsive. Cool. Monday morning, hey Jeff, this is Ryan with TRENDnet, just letting you know I got 2 ports on your switch there that aren't coming back responsive. I don't know if it's the device or the switch, but we have a guy coming out to kind of check on stuff. Apologize for the inconvenience, but we'll get you back up and running quickly. That beats out what we used to do about a decade ago, where it was customer gives us a call. Oh, I got to order a camera. I got to order an access control reader, something like that. Give us some time and get out there. It just streamlines everything for us completely. And Hive has really been a nice value add to all of our managed devices that we have because it's really been able to provide just those additional features at a much further reach, which is fantastic. We all know here in our world in the security realm, as soon as we roll a truck, the travel time's running. We have to pay our tech and all that type of stuff. So if we can do these things remotely, if we can look at just some trouble codes and some alerts that the switch is telling back, coming back to us and telling them that we're needing, we can go in there. We can look remotely at the power budget of the switch. We can see that, the devices that are connecting to it far surpass, what that budget is. So maybe we realize, okay, was something else added to it that we weren't aware of? Let's check the ports. Nope, we still have the available ports that we had left open when we installed it. So what's going on here? And we can literally go down at a granular level and actually look at the health statistics of these devices now, which is tremendous. These things, what may not have been, crucial back in the day are they're being looked at now. We're looking at how hard the CPU is working with these switches. We're looking to see, if the RAM, is adequate, for the application, if the budget is enough, how much is being consumed. And we can go even beyond that, even more if we wanted to, and actually see who's using it, who's accessing it. And then from there, we can make limitations. We can restrict website access. We can restrict keywords if we need to. We can set up guest networks and all that type of stuff. So really, we've kind of opened Pandora's box in a sense with networking, with the addition of remote management. And while we're not the first ones to have it, it really, really, really does make everything much easier, and it really allows us to kind of take full advantage of the networks that we're deploying to make sure that we can kind of get the biggest bang for our buck, and we're really fully utilizing these feature sets that we've kind of packed into these devices.
I think if I was an installer and I made your basically most of the information you just said there as part of my pitch, I think I'd have my customers sold. And I think yeah, there's a premium to pay for these things. As you go up a step, you pay a little bit more, of course. But the truck roll is key. I have some of my best customers tell me it's $300, Jeff, every time I roll a truck minimum. By the time I pay a rep or the tech, by the time I roll the truck, by the time gas, mileage, traffic, blah, 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 it's a minimum $300. So that's going to justify most of the minimal hardware expense. Yes, Hive jumps a little bit as well to give you that remote capability, but like how powerful is that? And I think if you're truly an IT or a networking professional, even I would say low voltage professional now, I would even maybe expand it a little bit further. You're definitely going to have clients that do this, whether it's a high-end residential customer that's going to call and scream at you every single time that camera didn't turn on for 3 seconds. Even if it comes back, they're still going to call and tell you that it didn't do it. So to your point, be proactive. Have an email already sent to the customer. Hey, Ryan, thanks for letting me know. Check your email. I actually sent you a note 3 hours ago telling you that we were on it. We were going to have it fixed. I think that's a huge
Absolutely.
defensive shield. And it also, from a protecting our customer perspective, right? The last thing I want is my customer, speaking as an installer, the last thing I would want is my customer reaching out to somebody else for advice. The minute, if they
Yep.
don't get an answer from me or they didn't get through to me right away, maybe it took me 3 hours to get back because I was busy with a personal event yesterday or whatever the case may be. These things really are preventatives for that. And as you said, proactive, proactive, proactive. That's the IT world. You should know in the IT world before your client does, ideally.
100%. And that kind of goes with a bunch of things. Absolutely. And I couldn't have said it better myself. It's, you know, we're I mean, it's 2026. I mean, we're in the age of pretty much everything and anything is wireless now, which is, pretty much everybody has a wireless device, a tablet, a computer,
Yeah.
a smartphone. So, we want to make sure that, we can connect these devices and stuff. And, when we're looking at being integrated into other deployments and other solutions, we may not be the focal point in terms of the key product there, but we're a critical component of that. We are responsible for powering and networking and to a degree managing those devices and kind of policing everything, kind of just we're almost like the traffic cop. We have a lot of data that's coming in and out real quick, and we got to make sure that it's going, those packets of data are going where they need to go, and that it's doing it as efficiently as possible. um, it's very easy, and this is kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast. It's very easy to overlook a small detail that could have a very large impact down the road. Whether it's the budget, whether it's the total bandwidth of the solution, whether it's the distance of, a wireless device and stuff like that. Um, so that's where it's like, we need to do what we can to, be proactive instead of reactive, because the moment we become reactive, whether our products are becoming reactive or from a sales perspective, we're becoming reactive, they're going to do exactly what you said. They're going to go elsewhere. So, what are we going to do to make sure that we can prevent that? We're going to go back and we're going to talk to the men and women in the industry that are the ones that are deploying these products. They're installing these products and they're working with them. And that's where a lot of our products have kind of come to fruition because we go out to these shows and we have these regional events and these customer facing and dealer facing engagements, and they're the ones that tell us what they need. They're the ones that tell us what's working and what's not, because we can't just go by and start cookie cutting things and just saying it's going to work for you, it's going to work for you. That's why our product line, our whole portfolio it's sub 400 products, and we've got some redundancy built in there, but there's a need for those. There's been needs that have necessitated those devices to be in the market, whether we're looking at automation for homes or automation for industrial applications, oil refineries, vehicle manufacturings, warehouses, what may have you, all of that stuff. So, that's where really just those communications, those talks, having, that level of engagement to let us know, like, what's going on. And that's almost one of the number one things is how can I be more efficient in my day to day? Like, what are you going to do for me as a networking manufacturer to bring value that's not already there? And I love those conversations because it's the same things that we're having now. It's like, okay, what are you currently doing? I think we can do a little bit better. Oh, you're doing it this way? I think we might be able to build some efficiency in here. How so? Let's try some remote management. Or better yet, if remote management isn't for you, we know it's not for everybody. Maybe we can get them in a better product for that. Maybe they were using unmanaged switches and they were realizing that maybe they were doing a disservice or maybe leaving themselves vulnerable. Moving over to a managed switch kind of resolves some of that. We can set up certain provisions and stuff like that, but also increase the control of things, to kind of make sure that things are kind of nestled in and kind of tucked in. And we don't have to really worry about that stuff because it can be cumbersome sometimes, but we try to mitigate that.
Yeah, that's fair. And every job's going to be unique. So that's what we are here for, to support our customers, and you're here to support me and my customers. So we're all here to kind of build that. And that's what we're trying to do today, is to start that education process for, to higher level for some people, but this is definitely going to be a great starting point for a lot. So let's go back to designing a network that doesn't cause these callbacks. Let's start there a little bit.
Sure.
So the term that I hear a lot that I'm not comfortable explaining out is daisy chaining versus topology. So let's start there. Can you give me a little bit of insight on that?
Yeah, between what, just like daisy chaining devices and just topography of the network.
Yeah, I think so, just in general.
Yeah. So I'm not a big proponent of daisy chaining. I'll start with just wireless, for example. So all of our wireless devices are full duplex. And pretty much what that means is our devices are capable of providing up to the maximum available bandwidth that they can achieve if the bandwidth from the ISP is there. There are other manufacturers out there, there's other wireless devices out there that are half duplex. So they'll take half of the achievable bandwidth automatically out the gate and they'll kind of have it. So half of it is for one way and half of it's for the other. So think of it like a two-lane road. So, we have a available gig. So on our wireless devices, we have 1 gig available, and guess what? We can have traffic going one way and the other way at the same time simultaneously. So much smoother, far more efficient, and just much faster. Other devices, older devices, they're half duplex. So think of it as like a one-way road. You literally gotta send one way, wait till the path is clear and it's received, and they'll send it back.
Nice.
In most cases, it's not a big hindrance, but if we're doing surveillance and stuff like that, if we're doing access control, if we're doing any type of mission critical type stuff, that's not key. That's not what we're looking for. Now we can add daisy chaining into some of our wireless devices, but as we do that, we're going to be pretty much having our available bandwidth every jump that we have. So not a big proponent on that. But the good news is we obviously have devices and we have solutions available that help us avoid having to do that. Now, looking at like the topography of like a network and stuff like that, I like this question because we don't talk about it much. The key thing here is if you start with one series of switch, let's just say it's being a managed switch, you got to keep managed switches along the entire line of the main backbone if you want to maintain that management. The moment that we have a managed switch at the top, let's just use Aartech for example. You guys have your data rack there. You guys start with a managed switch. That is the main switch that is responsible for pretty much distributing everything that you've got for your network. The moment that we introduce an unmanaged switch into that backbone, we lose all of the settings that we've set up until that point because the unmanaged switch doesn't know what to do with it. A lot of people like to use just the verbiage of calling it like a dumb switch or a dumb device. I don't really like that because if you look at the OSI model of networking, they technically still fall under layer two. So there's some intelligence there. We're just blocked off from being able to do anything about it. Now, obviously, once we get to the edge of the network, it's fair game to kind of add whatever we want. So, if we're kind of branching down and then we're doing a data drop to your desk, data drop to Rob's desk, Ali's desk, whoever, we can put just a simple unmanaged switch there to just connect our laptops and the devices that we have to it. But we definitely want to make sure that we kind of keep that in mind because it's happened more than once where we've gone out and a customer has deployed like a layer two switch so they can kind of set schedules and kind of manage everything. But then we kind of look at the topography and all of a sudden, oops, that 8 port right there is not managed. And you got hangups here because you're wondering why we're not connecting to this network, if we partition the VLAN or anything like that, we've got to go back and realize, well, it's just because this guy's kind of sitting here with, that loading screen kind of above his head, that little icon. He doesn't know what to do with it. So he's kind of sitting there shrugging his shoulders and it's like, well, I'll just do what I think I need to do with it. Um, Type of stuff. But conversely, it can work the same way. If we start at the top with an unmanaged switch and kind of let that trickle down, and then we kind of plug in a managed switch, our management starts right there and moves forward. It doesn't work backwards. So we always want to kind of keep in mind with that. So you want to keep like switches and like devices with one another until we kind of get to the edge there.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think you summed that up well. And this is kind of a follow-up, but I think you touched a lot of this already. And this is hard without a specific case study, but one big switch versus multiple smaller ones. Can you just kind of touch on that a little bit? I think you kind of did a little bit there already, but can you go a little bit deeper?
Yeah, definitely. Bigger is always better. Obviously, bigger doesn't always fit the application. But if we can always home run our devices, and what I mean by that is if we can always hardwire our devices back to the main switch, that's always going to be the best. That's the best way that we can pretty much assure ourselves that we can maintain the highest bandwidth achievable based on what we're working with from the ISP. But some needs negate having multiple switches, and that could be just different departments, different buildings, or just they serve different purposes. So I'll definitely always start with the biggest switch that fits. Now, obviously, if we have somebody that just they have a need for just 4 devices connecting, I'm not going to recommend a 52 port switch. But if we're just sitting there having conversations and just through the discovery process of kind of talking to them and asking questions, we find out that maybe down the road they may be expanding, that would probably kind of give me a good indicator. Okay, we're going to kind of beef this up a little bit. And I'll just explain to Mr. or Mrs. Customer, we're doing this because of X, Y, and Z based off of A, B, and C. And in most cases, they understand that. But in other cases too, some people just prefer having smaller switches. They prefer to do it that way. Now, our switches are not traditional stacking switches, but we do have the ability of obviously trunking ports if we need to just kind of, increase our achievable bandwidth and stuff. But that's going to be a little bit more of a more technical conversation. But definitely want to go bigger first because we want to make sure that we can get all the devices on one switch. The more devices we can have on one switch, the easier management's going to be. But we're also just going to keep the overall cost down too. That's a big key of this as well. Is like networking can get expensive, and it can get expensive pretty quick, especially when we start increasing our budget and we also start increasing like our management feature sets and stuff like that. So we want to be mindful of that as well too, because we definitely know that, especially in today's economy, in today's market, there's a lot of people that are price savvy and price conscious. Not everybody's looking to, spend, hundreds and thousands of dollars on stuff.
Yeah. And again, this is maybe tough, but when I was a contractor, we used to, we would order our materials for a job and we would add 10 to 15% for spillage, errors, damage, whatever. Is there any kind of rule of thumb? Again, I know every vertical and category is going to be different, but is there a general rule of thumb that customers can kind of say, based on everything that I see, I'm looking at this switch, but I should kind of add 10%, add 20%. Is there any kind of a formula that they can kind of roll to?
So yes and no. So there's really no set like formula that I have, but I kind of group this into like my future proofing spiel that I do. And it's like, looking at our switches, it's like the one thing that I don't want to do is I don't want a switch to be deployed that is full. So what I mean by that is I don't want to sell a 16 port switch for 16 devices. The reason for that is one is budget. Obviously, we want to make sure that when we have a switch that's filled, we want to make sure we have adequate power for doing that. Now, if we're not doing PoE, power is not a concern of ours because we don't need a power or anything. So I always like leaving at least a handful of ports open, really no more than 5. So, if we're looking at 16 ports needed for, the devices we're connecting, I'm going to initially recommend like a 20 port switch, or maybe even a 24, depending on what the actual scope of it's going to be. And that same be said too, like when we start looking at, out like beyond our switches and stuff like that, when we look at category cable, whether it's Cat 5 or Cat 6, we are limited on the actual distance that we can run that cable. That's about 330 feet, give or take.
Yeah.
And when I was with an integrator, we always kept about 10 to 15% back as just a regular service loop. But also, we didn't want to stretch that to the max because we didn't want to have to worry about data loss or voltage drop.
Sure.
Obviously, like with our switches and stuff like that, you don't really have to worry about that from the hardware perspective. But we always want to budget for a little bit more. Absolutely. Just for added reassurance from just a power consumption, a networking consumption, but also bandwidth too. That's a big thing as well. If we have a lot of devices that are gobbling up bandwidth, the last thing that we want to do is have 300 megabytes coming into a network, and then all of a sudden we're taking consistently 200 to 250. That's going to leave virtually nothing left for anybody. So definitely a lot of variables to take into consideration, of course.
Sure. No, no, that's fair. Okay, so we've touched about a lot of things. So I'm going to kind of go into what I like to be a bit of a lightning round here. So throw a couple random questions, and I know Ali's got a couple prep too. So biggest networking myth that installers believe.
Biggest networking myth. That layer two or enterprise networking is always needed.
Gotcha. Okay. And so can you explain that a little bit further for those of us?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our realm, TRENDnet is considered an SMB networking manufacturer. So that's a small to medium sized business. That's what that prefix there is or that acronym is there for. But we kind of have broken that mold. So I like to tell people that we're kind of SMB plus because we do cater to much larger commercial deployments than people would expect us to. But on top of that, if you were to look at the OSI model, above us is enterprise level networking. And that is like the Ferraris of networking. That is definitely top tier, very expensive networking. And it definitely has its place. But with that, there's a lot of brand presence, but I think there's a lot of not really jealousy per se, but there's a lot of, I guess, movement in the market where a competitor may see someone else be like, oh, well, they're using enterprise level networking. That's what I need to be doing. And
Gotcha.
networking definitely has its place, but it's not something that we would deploy for like an access control or a gate control or like just basic networking. That's definitely more towards higher enterprise level, Fortune 500. Like we're doing mass deployments that cover various states, like whole country type stuff, where we need to have one centralized location where we can literally manage everything to a very granular level. And while it does have its place, a lot of these professionals that I see that lead with enterprise level networking, they're pricing themselves out of jobs because they're going with a switch that's $2,000 to $3,000, but they're only using it to power network devices and maybe set up a VLAN. And while those products are great and they have their place, we can save significant amount of time and money and resources by going with one of our many managed switches that we have that provide identical features, identical performance at a much better price point. So it allows our dealers and our installers alike to be far more competitive and far more fair in their markets alike. But more importantly, take care of the customer. That's the big thing. So, when we're at these shows and stuff like that, a lot of people ask, like, oh, like, well, what type of enterprise management do you have? It's like, oh, like we don't have any. Like we stop at layer two, but that's because we see the need that we have for that kind of stops at layer two. We don't really see a lot of the professionals that use our products really trying to go down and look at like data packets and stuff and kind of review that stuff, or really do anything, that you'd see like almost in the matrix where they're kind of seeing all this code kind of come down and do all that stuff. A lot of our professionals aren't really doing that. They want to go through and they want to kind of simplify stuff because again, time is money, right? So with a lot of this enterprise stuff, the interface is great. It's very intuitive and it's very thorough. But you got to know what you're doing. There's definitely a learning curve with that to a degree. And we try to simplify that stuff. We definitely try to keep our interfaces and our products very user friendly. So if you're a 20-year seasoned veteran in networking, you're going to love our products. Or if you're completely green and starting out, you're not going to feel overwhelmed or inundated with information.
Nice. All right, so customer challenge here. I'll throw this out. If somebody out there is using an enterprise situation and kind of disagrees with this, throw us the scenario. Let Ryan and I work through that for you. I'd love to put a couple case studies up. So
Absolutely. I
perfect.
have nothing against enterprise. I love it, but
Yeah.
there's
No.
definitely there's a need for it. Just like with us, no one's going to take one of our products and go deploy it into an enterprise level network. I mean, they can, they're more than welcome to, but there are limitations, whether it's a hardware
Sure.
or it's a software limitation and stuff like that. And I think that's where education is key. I know that's one of the big things that we've kind of mentioned throughout this whole podcast is just doing our part to make sure, that the customers know when and where to use our products, where they're, where it's applicable over here, maybe where it may not. I'm a very humble person. I have no problem letting people know that, hey, I can't do that, but I can do this. And I think this is suitable and will be acceptable for the solution that we're talking about.
And I could probably count on one hand in my 7 or 8 years or however long it's been now since I've been here, but that where we've exceeded that, right? Like you said, there are exceptions, but 9 out of 10 times it's education and looking at it maybe from a slightly different scope. So, okay, perfect. This is one of my favorite questions before I got one or two more and then I'll throw it to Ali. The worst network setup you've ever seen?
Oh man. Oh,
Too many, eh?
no. Okay. So it's okay. So I'm trying to jog my memory here. This is actually a really good question. So this wasn't a TRENDnet network, but I was brought in to try and help kind of troubleshoot a little bit. But this was actually out in the Midwest. I want to say it was Oklahoma. A gentleman had a very large property that he built on one side, and then on the back half of the property, he had kind of carved out some land for his family. Um, the long and short of it is he had a whole bunch of homes and stuff built and stuff like that. And he wanted to pretty much set up a wireless bridge and all that type of stuff. So what ended up happening is nothing was connecting, nothing was working. The reason for that is there was a massive lake in between these two, or in between all the buildings, that nobody told us about. Water refracts the signal like crazy. So, we need to shoot up and above that as best as possible. But that wasn't the kicker. The kicker is they had pretty much everything linked up to um, unmanaged, but also non-PoE switches and stuff like that. So the installer set everything up and programmed it on the bench at their office. They went out to deploy everything. They line everything up. They used injectors to power the APs and stuff like that, but they plugged
Jeez.
everything into unmanaged non-PoE switches. So literally they're going out there and they're wondering like the switch is on, like we plugged in an injector to the AP, we confirmed it had power and all of this stuff. And we're sitting there and I'm sitting there looking at everything and I'm like, I don't see why this won't work. I go to Google Images. I was like, well, we have the body of water. We may need to kind of shoot the signal around there. You guys may need to add an additional antenna if need be. And then I just was like, well, can you send me like a parts list, like what you installed? I would like to kind of look at data sheets or kind of like, kind of dig a little deeper. And then I found out that everything that they were doing was unmanaged and it was non-PoE. I was like, we need to replace all of this.
Yeah.
And then furthermore, we finally went through all of that stuff. They didn't decide to go with TRENDnet, which is fine. Just wanted to take care of the customer, maybe spit out the good word of TRENDnet. Um, and they turn around and do all that stuff, but then they didn't know what they were doing. Kind of came out of the woodwork that these guys weren't very proficient at networking, and they were kind of just taking a stab at it because everybody in their community was kind of, the competitors of theirs were actually stepping up and doing all these things. So again, they thought they saw what their competitors were doing. They need to kind of go down that path, and with that, they did in fact turn around and go to a enterprise managed switch. So the customer paid initially, I would hope that it got returned and stuff like that, but paid significant amounts of money for a solution that we could have done for just, probably under $1,000. We could have saved a considerable amount of
Jeez.
money. Um, so it's just was absolutely deadly. It was one of those things where at the end of the day, I was kind of finished up the day and I kind of chuckled a little bit and I'm like, wasn't expecting that one. Like, at a minimum, I was expecting, some other things, but it was just off the cuff, off the top of my head. That's one of the rough ones that I've seen recently.
Perfect. Well, my last question, I think you've answered enough that I'm going to kind of answer it myself. If you could give installers one rule to follow, what would it be? And I'm going to answer it myself, and you can tell me if you disagree. But basically, learn as much as you can, qualify the opportunity. If you're not comfortable in making the decision yourself, reach out to myself or Ryan and his team, and let's make sure we qualify the customer from the beginning because you can't go back. Like you said, if that equipment couldn't be returned, that customer's out twice. That installer
Yeah.
ate it, whatever the case may be. It's somebody somewhere, maybe you're paying a restocking fee because it's used equipment, whatever the case may be. So, qualifying the customer education, which we're going to come back to wrap up in a few minutes here, is also key. So, are you comfortable with that answer for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could just add to it a little bit, just, help is here. It's, there's no shame in not knowing something. You said it best yourself. You only know what you know. And, in the industry that we're in, regardless of what it is, things are ever evolving. They're changing. Standards are changing, whether it's wireless or PoE, management perspectives and the abilities are changing and stuff like that as well. So help is there. There's, definitely, lean on your peers. Competition doesn't always have to be ugly. I know a lot of professionals who, in their own right, are competitors of their peers, but they come together to work together. They share ideas. They share, common practices and stuff like that as well. But definitely educate yourself. Definitely, if you see us at a show, stop by. Let's chat. Ask your questions. It's in the long and short of it, once we understand the basic principles and concepts of networking, it is really easy. It really is. After that, it's just part numbers and stuff like that, and just kind of determining what it is that better suits your needs. But it's all there. That's what we're here for. So yeah, definitely ask questions. Let's jot them down on a piece of paper, shoot me an email, swing by a show and see me. We're definitely here because we all have the same common interest, and that's helping the customer. Making sure that they're taken care of, but also that we have a customer for life, not only for the professional, not only for Aartech, and not only for TRENDnet, but just everybody across the board that they're taking care of it. We can definitely do that collectively.
Yeah, and again, if you don't have a direct connection to Ryan and his team, you've got myself, my team here. So just reach out to us, let us know. We can bring Ryan in for a demo if we need to, but the support is here. You know that. Okay, perfect. Ali, I'm going to throw it to you.
Okay, cool. So I have some quick questions for you, Ryan. And the first one is for people that are new to TrendNet, what is something that they should know about your brand that they may not know already?
Support is our number one thing, hands down. We can't do our job as well as we can without the support that we have and the support that we provide. We have done a lot in the 36 years that we've been in the industry, and we've made a lot of changes. But the reason that we were able to make those changes is the support that we garnered from the market and from the professionals and from partners like you guys, but also the support that we're able to provide as well. And I think that's probably the key thing that differentiates and separates us from anybody else. Um, Networking is standard based, for the most part. So PoE is going to be PoE except for active and passive too, and wireless for the most part. That's also standard based. But at the end of the day, if something goes wrong or even if something goes right, it's were they taken care of? Is that support there? And that's where I really pride myself here at TrendNet and like what we do is just making sure that everything that we're doing, anything that the customer does, anything that our professionals do, anybody that touches TrendNet, that they know if anything goes south, north, east, or west, we're going to be here to help take care of them. We offer a lifetime warranty on all of our switches, which we're very proud of. But we have long tenured, seasoned networking professionals that we have the pleasure of working with in our corporate office that provide just tremendous support. And that's really key. And I think that's just one of the big things that, if anything, anyone should leave knowing about TrendNet is the fact that we're going to support you. And if in just we're going to see it through the end and we're going to make sure that things are done right.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Another question that I like to ask everyone is, what is a unique way that you've seen your product used or something that you've seen that made you go, wow, that's smart?
I like this. I like this one. Let's see here. Um, a way that our products were used in a way that really made me go, wow. I'm trying to think here. Oh man. Okay. I'm not, you guys know me. I can talk, but this one's got me. Um, oh man. I'm trying to think. I talk to so many people and they do so many cool things. Uh,
We can always
oh,
defer that
actually,
one.
yeah, I
Going?
do have one
Go? Go.
actually. I do
Beautiful.
have one. So you guys are familiar with obviously drones, right? Small personal drones. The military has big drones. Even like
Yep.
Amazon and the likes have talked about like drone delivery and stuff like that. I was actually at one of the industry trade shows, ISC West, actually last year. and actually was talking to a guy who is in the kind of the drone industry per se. And actually, they have one of our PoE powered um, industrial switches actually powering the rechargeable battery packs that the actual drone self docks, and it can actually exchange its own batteries and then resume flight. And the reason why that's important is they use these drones with the linemen and stuff like that, because in rural areas where they can't run the actual like the infrastructure cable or the cabling itself because it's either marshland or something like that, they actually hook the cables up to these guys that can carry like up to like 250 pounds and fly these things over to the next pylon to the next pole that I've got to get to. And first of all, I was absolutely fascinated by the drone itself, but fascinated that they actually found our PoE Plus switch that was actually able to power their battery packs, that this thing could actually self dock, pretty much discharge its depleted battery, pretty much reload its new battery, and just take off and do its thing. I was blown away, blown away. So that's probably got to be one of the coolest ways I've seen one of our switches used outside of the normal, railway or manufacturing or just like in a data closet at like, Tesla or something like that. I was just so cool. So cool.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And and that's how integral networking is in everything, right? I mean, in some way, shape, or form, it really does touch in almost every aspect of our worlds anyways. So I just want to say a couple things. If installers take one thing away from this, we said it at the beginning. Solid networking makes everything else look better, let alone work
Okay.
maybe, but everything else looks better, saves money, saves callbacks. In the trade world, we know that you think hiring a pro is expensive, hiring a rookie first, right? Like hire the cheapest guy first. You're probably going to end up paying for both. I think that's what kind of a lot of what we talked about today. Let's qualify this right from the beginning. Let's budget price wise accordingly to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the customer and hopefully future proofing a little bit further ahead. So, with that in note, to kind of wrap up today, you and I were talking the other day about training. Can you touch a little bit about some of the tools that TRENDnet can offer to potentially anybody? Is there anything out there that we can, like if an installer wants to level up their networking or maybe somebody's new to networking?
Absolutely, absolutely. Appreciate this. Yes. So, as a company, we actually conduct monthly webinars. So with that, we will go over various new products and solutions that we've seen our products in or that our products were designed for. So we do that monthly, and we also send out a monthly newsletter as well. Both of those are great resource tools as far as education goes. Even for the seasoned TrendNet professional to someone who's completely new to it. Definitely very informative. And then that's actually led by one of our senior pre-sales engineers, Evan Davis. Very knowledgeable individual. And those webinars are very well attended every month. And because we're based out of the West Coast, we actually have two sessions, one in the morning and also one in the afternoon as well. So we can kind of cover
Beautiful.
customers on the West Coast, but also the customers on the East Coast as well. Additionally, last year we actually worked closely with NTC, which is the National Training Center, and we actually finally developed our own TrendNet Certified Network Engineering course. It's about an 8 to 10 hour self-paced training that kind of covers anything and everything TrendNet, and really kind of brushes up on networking one-on-one, and then kind of carries people through our products and the various solutions and stuff that they're in. Again, kind of learn at your own pace, which is great. It is obviously tested at the end. And then at the end of it, we get you over a nice little certificate, letting everybody know that you're a certified TrendNet network engineer. And you feel even more confident about going out there and pushing TrendNet, selling TrendNet, and just using it in your everyday deployments. Because, at the end of the day, with everything that we do, we're only as strong as the foundation we're built on, right? And everything is kind of going towards networking now. So we want to make sure that we build a good foundation with our products, with our company to make sure that our customers and our professionals have that confidence to kind of go out there and deploy their systems.
I think that's really key, and I'll give a case study here with access control. Anybody that knows me and my group, we've been doing more and more push with the access control because what we found was a lot of our customers weren't doing it. And one of the biggest reasons for turning down a potential triple figure access job is networking. Jeff, I do
Yep.
not want to put locks in that multi-residential because I don't want to be responsible for the network. And it's again, you're giving up your customer to somebody else. So I think, the university, as I'll call it, and the webinars, we've got some information on our sites, as most of our customers know. Get into it, get some questions, ask myself, ask Ryan. but definitely get into that training. 8 to 10 hours is nothing. An eye opener in terms of what it kind of opens up for you and does teach you the one-on-one, and then how to use the TRENDnet products, as you said, is going to be more than enough for most of our customer base and most of the applications.
Yep. And then, and furthermore, if I could add too, obviously you guys know I can talk. I love this stuff. I'm like a kid in a candy store. But another thing that we can do and we love doing, and we've actually done for you guys as well, we can also do one-off individual preferred training for our customers. A lot of times customers, may not have time to join the webinar, which is totally understandable. 10 o'clock on the East Coast, which is 7 on the West Coast, and then 4 on the East Coast, 1 on the West Coast, sometimes doesn't work. That's kind of at the start and the end of the day for most people. And also maybe sometimes people don't want to do the self-paced training and stuff, but we can certainly also set up trainings for our customers as well. So if we have somebody who, maybe is new to TRENDnet completely, new to networking completely, and they would just like a personalized kind of one-off training for them and their team, we'd be more than happy to accommodate that as well. We're a small company that does big things, but we're not big to forget people. We know how and why we got here. So anytime we can have that personal level of engagement and stuff like that, we absolutely love that, because what we'll do is we'll sit down and we can talk specifically with them. Like, hey, what are you looking to gain from this? What are you looking to know? What is your level of networking proficiency? And then we can literally build a one-off training specifically for them and for their company and stuff like that. And we've seen great success with that as well. So I definitely want to make sure that your listeners on this podcast know that that's available to them as well. And we'd be more than happy to meet with them.
And I very much appreciate the support. You're small enough to give that warm service, but you're big enough to fulfill everything. And I think that's kind of our motto here. We're a family-run business. We're a small team in comparison to some, but we've got a lot of expert, we've got a lot of knowledge, and we've got great partners like yourself. So thank you very, very much for that.
Definitely. I'm always on board. Always great talking with you guys. Always appreciate any opportunity I can have to partner with you guys. I can't sing y'all's praises enough. It's without partners like you guys, we wouldn't be where we're at. I wouldn't be able to do what I do on a day-to-day basis. So thank you guys. Thank you for your support. Thank you for the dedication that you've shown TRENDnet, and the love that you guys have shown us over the years. It's truly been an honor working with you guys, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the future has in store for us, and just kind of just making everyone understand networking and just blow it up, man. Make it big. Make everybody know TRENDnet.
I agree. There's a reason why you're in our season 1 of our podcast here for our finally launched YouTube channel. So much
All
appreciated.
right.
So thank you very much for joining us, Ali and Ryan, as always.
Likewise. Thank you guys so much. Pleasure speaking with y'all.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you for joining us. That has been another episode of the Aartech Pro Connect podcast. We'll be back with more discussion soon. In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Bye-bye.